Diablo as a series is incredibly important to me. I'm in my early 40s. I grew up with Diablo 1 and Diablo 2, spending countless hours at my friend's house trying to play LAN with D1 and D2 while we were figuring everything out and just learning about the game during our high school years. It really was something that brought my friends and I together and brought me countless hours of fun. And even to this day, I still feel like Diablo 1 still holds up among other ARPGs, even though it was very much in its infancy at its time of release. There's something about the atmosphere, the style, the absolute horror, and then the fun that Diablo actually brings as a series. I felt like Diablo 3 was an incredible low point in that series as well because it felt too casual and far removed from what made it so great in the beginning. But now comes Diablo 4, and with it, the meme that Diablo 4 really is just for dads with 7 kids, 6 jobs, and about an hour a day to play games. And honestly, that's kind of where I fit in my life right now. Even though I still don't really much play Diablo 4 anymore. In fact, I've put more time to Last Epoch and Path of Exile instead. And I feel like so many other people are doing that exact same thing. You see, Diablo 4 went through an incredible rough patch the last 9 months, where a big meme going around was that you only play the even seasons 2 and 4 and you skip the odd seasons 1 and 3 because those were never good at all. But now with the 4th season coming out and an entire revamp on the loot system, this may as well be the last chance to in fact save Diablo 4. The thing is though, this game has such great potential, but they've been squandering it the entire time. Having almost 9,000 people work on this game, nobody really knew what was trying to get done with Diablo 4, and I feel like it had a major identity crisis as well. The skill tree for Diablo 4 was incredibly simplified. In fact, I felt like it was less choice and less opportunity than what you had in Diablo 3. When you look at the amount of modifiers you had to skills, you only had 2 options comparative to what you had in Diablo 3 as well, which was like 4 or 5 if I can remember correctly. It was far too long ago. So there was a lot of simplicity there for new and casual players, but then when they got to the Paragon board, there was far too much complexity at the same time. It felt like Diablo 4 had 2 different teams. One team trying to emulate Path of Exile and try to bring it to a more casual audience, and the other team saying, no, we need to go ahead and just make it as casual as possible. And I feel like the 2 of those sections were completely just butting heads the entire time throughout development, and that's kind of why we got this sort of like mishmash of what happened when the game first released. But it seems like after 9 months, things may be looking up because the Diablo team put out a huge PTR for the new Loot 2.0, and the reception has been pretty good, especially with a lot of positive things coming around out of it. So let's go over a couple of things that are going to be changing in terms of the new loot system, and then we'll go from there. So besides fixing a lot of how loot drops between each world tier, the big thing that's going to be happening is you're going to be getting less loot, but in the change, you're actually going to be getting specific loot with only a few affixes. It looks like a main stat and then another modifier on top of that. Now, one of the big worries for me immediately on this is the fact that where is the loot filter? Why can't we have that? And for some reason, they're stating that, hey, we're going to be optimizing it so that way you're going to have enough loot while you play but not be overburdened with loot. And I feel like they're really avoiding the issue with not having a loot filter in the game off the bat. There's going to be a lot of junk people just don't want to see, and I think not having the ability to just remove that to have smoother gameplay experiences may in fact be a problem. But either way, I do want to test it to see how it feels when it goes live. Another concern for me about the new item structure, having such few affixes and then having to craft on the other ones, is are items and sets going to feel very homogenous? Is everybody basically just going to look for the same exact things regardless of class? Or are we going to have some sort of like ability to craft something new and different to actually change how classes play? That's one of the big things that makes Path of Exile so incredibly great. Everybody can come up with something new, something different, something wild and broken. And really it all depends how viable that build is going to be, depending upon like the time it takes and also the amount of money that build takes. A lot of divines, baby. Sometimes it takes a little bit too much for things to go off. But that's also that concern that comes back to Diablo. Will people have the ability to create something new and different with these affixes that, even though we're trimming away so many of them, is there still going to be the option and ability for someone to create something really cracked and broken and figure something out, or even just experiment with? It's great that we're simplifying things and removing the damage only on Tuesdays when your enemy's 5 feet from you and you sneeze in your left hand, not your right, but then you farted in the back end and it went downwind, not upwind, then you get double damage. Getting rid of those is great. The problem though is, did we trim too much so that way everything is just too simple? Or is it going to be a level of complexity that we can actually apply to make things a little bit more, let's say, fun? Now, the next thing that's going to be showing up is the fact that they are now doing greater affixes. And I think this is a great idea because you definitely want to have chase items, and you definitely want to have the ability to push items and your gear and your stats to the next level, especially as you keep growing. The great thing about Path of Exile is the fact that it can escalate to the moon practically, and even beyond, because there's so many ways you can modify your gear and your equipment and your build and your stats and everything along that end to really push yourself to a next level that they want to go ahead and say, hey, do you want to test out what your build can do? Here you go. And greater affixes are a fantastic way, in my opinion, of really helping players either find those chase items, open up trade, and of course increase the actual currency use of the opals, which is really nice because that's one way you can get greater affix gear. My concern is going to be the randomization and the amount of times you're going to get items with greater affixes, and the drop chance percentage of actually having those items with the right stats with the greater affix that you want to apply to your character. But even if that does happen, the fact that they increased the ability that you can trade items with greater affixes, as long as you haven't crafted on them, is incredibly powerful, because maybe it may not work for you, but you could find it with somebody else, and that trade is really good. Now, the caveat is, of course, you can't craft on that greater affixed item, whether it's a unique or uber unique, as well as legendary. So be aware of that as well. Now, tempering seems to be a very cool way of actually putting those small modifiers that really made build specific explode into just cool stuff. So getting tempering manuals while you play the game normally, and then apply them to the blacksmith and then adding to the item depending upon the durability that you have in that item to have that tempering happen, is a great thing. And the fact that it is only for a specific handful of items or even specific handful of affixes is going to be really nice, because then you're not sitting there trying to figure out what's going on and they're going to be dropping consistently. My concern though is that once a season is over, those manuals basically disappear. And really, am I going to be walking around with a bunch of manuals in my bag on top of that? It really feels kind of odd. And although I do like the fact that, hey, we can go ahead and temper items and just really replace them and do what we want and experiment with those things, it really does feel like adding that additional sort of modifier to your build that you want to kind of work through on those items and working in that direction, which could be nice depending upon if it's actually implemented well. And we'll find out how that looks on the 14th. Now, masterworking is going to be what everybody's going to be diving into near that end game process, because you do have to go and get items from the pit, which is finally something that we have for end game. And then increasing all those stats in those items by those 12 ranks really is going to be a cool idea and really provide something for people to chase for, to really optimize their build and get the highest amount of modifiers they can for their build and what they're working on. But a really great thing that they pulled, in my opinion, from Path of Exile is the ability to scour those items. Now, you don't scour it completely if you use a scouring orb, if that's sort of like irrelevant to what we're talking about. If you don't like what happened in the 12 ranks of masterworking, you didn't really get the affix or the actual stat to get boosted, you can then reset all the masterworking rather than resetting the entire item completely. So even if you feel like you bricked it, you don't really have to worry about that, because you can reset all the masterworking crafting and then restart masterworking again to get the actual stats that you want to get. Now, of course, there is a level of gamba associated with this, because you are going to be gambling via the RNG gods about which stat it's going to be, and you could even stack multiple stats at the same time or one specific stat over and over. So hey, RNG gods, baby, here we go. Now, besides all of my nerding out about the crafting, which is really the biggest thing I felt that Diablo 4 truly needed when it first came out, The endgame activities and the changes to Helltide have been honestly something that seems very, very cool. The pit just basically feels like rifts that we had in Diablo 3 that you then escalate to make more difficult, and you just keep going on and on and on from there, which, hey, fantastic. You love it. But the big thing that really bothered me about Diablo 4 was the fact that it was open world, and really it didn't make a lot of sense to me because everybody was just sitting there in nightmare dungeons all day back and forth just grinding them out. Now the fact that Helltides seem to be much more impactful and they're going to be dropping the proper items from that world tier now. You're not going to get like sacred stuff when you're in tier 4. You're not going to get all this wild, wacky gear. This is going to look like it's just a waste of time by doing this. And now the fact that the actual time between Helltides has been incredibly shortened, this feels like the proper way to actually play the game. And I really look forward to have multiple ways of going through. Rather than spamming nightmare dungeons, you can do Helltides, you can do NMs, you can do the pit, you can do so many other things. And I think that's what's really missing with Diablo 4 that PoE does so incredibly well. Now granted, PoE has 10 years of content behind it, but you can do so much inside of Path of Exile that you cannot do in sort of Diablo 4. I can do essence farming, I can do Abyss, I can do Breach, I can do Heist, I can do so many things that so many other players can actually do and then use to impact the trade economy and then trade for other items from other actual aspects of that game is really something that is just missing from Diablo 4. But starting to add more styles of endgame content, the pit being one of them, fixing Helltides is another, nightmare dungeons being another, that's a great thing because giving people the option to switch things up as they're playing is never bad, because maybe one day you don't want to do Helltides, but you want to do dungeons instead, or you only have time to do a couple of things, so you want to mix things up and be the most efficient you possibly can. That is a great way to figure out small gaps in gear, figure out a great way of learning new stuff, or even trying to rebuild your entire character. So these things do feel like really positive, impactful changes. All in all, this does feel like the Diablo 4 that we should have had at launch, and it feels more now like everybody, and the team specifically, is finally playing the video game they've been working on to try and fix those issues. Hopefully what'll happen is that the crafting systems inside of masterworking and tempering and even the pit will help increase people's wanting to play this game and even provide more content for them in the end. And on top of that, having the dev team listen to feedback from players to understand, hey, we should probably make these changes, and then working in that direction to make the game feel better. Hopefully after this season, this Loot 2.0 change, this may help save the game, because if this puts Diablo 4 in a good space as a good base to build off of, then we're going to be having a good direction. However, though, they need to work fast, because Last Epoch is already working on their cycles, and that game already has a phenomenal base on its 1.0 launch. It didn't need 9 months to catch up to where it is right now. And that's sort of where I feel things may be happening and changing with D4. If the team really goes out and starts putting out season after season after season, that's going to be a big hit. Then we may see something really good, and we may see a game that people who are casual really get into, and if you have time as an intermediate or advanced ARPG player, you may start to sink more time into as well, or in between other games on top of that. But with that being said, you've got PoE 2 on the horizon, you've got the cycles for Last Epoch, you've got PoE 1 seasons, and now you've got D4. So your time between ARPGs may be split a little bit. But honestly, this is going to be a good sign for anyone who's enjoying the genre, because now you're going to have possible good options to play any kind of game. And there's not going to be any wrong game to play as long as they're all doing the right thing and really listening to feedback from the community and providing those proper aspects correctly. So with that being said, let me know what you guys think. Are you going to go back and try the new Diablo 4 season, see how it feels and progress from there? Are you going to go to Endgame and work on your items? Or are you just going to say, hey, look, I gave you guys 9 months. It's over. I'm moving on to Last Epoch and PoE 2. So we'll see how things go from there. Hopefully, fingers crossed. I really don't want Diablo to go down the wayside, because I love this series far too much, especially it being such a nostalgia bait for me. And they actually get their act together, and this becomes a great base for them to build off of. Unfortunately, 9 months too late. But we'll see. Games have come back from far worse. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. I do appreciate it. If you want to see more of these kinds of videos, more ARPG guides as well, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to keep putting out more content here because this is really something I care about, so definitely enjoy. With all that being said, y'all, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you have a great one, and I'll see you next time.